Gilbert was excited. Everyone from his day camp was going on an overnight trip to Camp Hidiho. Mother helped him pack his favorite pajamas, bug spray, and a flashlight. "Don't forget, Teddy," she said, holding up Gilbert's stuffed possum. "I'm not taking Teddy," Gilbert said. "Sleepaway camp is for big kids." Frank was worried when Gilbert met him on the bus. He said, "My brother told me there's a ghost at Camp Hidiho." Patty peered over her seat and said, "He's just trying to scare you." But Lewis said, "It's true, everybody knows about the Hidiho ghost. You'd better watch out, Gilbert. He might jump out and yell boo." "But Gilbert said you can't scare me, Lewis. There's no such thing as ghosts." After a long ride, the bus pulled into the Hidiho campground. Gilbert and Frank unpacked in the boys' cabin. "Bunk beds," Frank said, taking a top bunk. "I like sleepaway camp." "Me too," said Gilbert, taking the bottom bunk. But Lewis said, "Just wait until dark. Then we'll see how much you like it." "You'd better not try to scare us," Gilbert said, "or you'll be sorry." "Boo-hoo," said Lewis. "I'm scared." For the rest of the afternoon, they swam and canoed and hiked with big kids. Gilbert was hot and thirsty after all the activity. He drank 3 cups of juice at supper time. "Oh, you're drinking bug juice," Lewis said as he passed Gilbert's table. Gilbert looked at his empty cup. He was sure it was fruit juice, but he drank a big glass of water to wash it down. Just in case. After supper, they roasted marshmallows over the campfire. Lewis said, "Let's tell ghost stories." He was shining his flashlight under his chin, making scary faces. Frank whispered in Gilbert's ear, "I don't think I want to hear a ghost story." "Me either," said Gilbert quietly. But one of the big kids had already stood up. He said, "The campers who have been here all summer have heard this story, but I'll share it with our guests." He started speaking in a spooky voice. "What I'm about to tell you is all true. It happened many years ago, right here at Camp Hidiho. It was a dark and stormy night. A camper went out to get some water from the bathroom. He had his canteen and a candle, but the wind blew the candle out, poof, and he lost his way. He wandered for days, weeks, and finally, years. They say he's still lurking around here as a ghost." Everyone jumped. Patty's eyes were very wide. Gilbert's were wider. "They call him Lost Leonard, and sometimes you can hear him in the woods at night banging his canteen. Like this." The storyteller banged a metal can against a rock, clankety-clank-clank. Then he crouched down and said softly, "And sometimes if you listen very carefully, you can hear Lost Leonard crying boo-hoo boo-hoo." No one made a sound. Gilbert held his breath. Then right behind him came a loud boo. Gilbert flew off his seat. He turned and saw Lewis laughing at him. "Lewis," he said, "that's not funny." "What a scaredy cat," Lewis said. "I am not," Gilbert answered. But his heart was beating very quickly. "Lights out," the counselor said when the campers were finally in their bunks. "Good night, sleep tight, don't let the bedbugs bite," Lewis answered. Everybody shut off their flashlights. Except Gilbert. What if there were bedbugs in his bunk? He checked inside his sleeping bag. There weren't any bugs in it, but there was something soft and furry there, Teddy. His mother must have slipped it in when Gilbert wasn't looking. "Hey, scaredy cat," Lewis shouted from the other side of the room. "Light out." Gilbert turned off his flashlight. He closed his eyes. He opened his eyes. He closed them again. It was so dark, he couldn't tell if his eyes were open or closed. He hugged his Teddy tightly until he finally fell asleep. But in the middle of the night, Gilbert was wide awake again. He wished he hadn't had so much juice. Now he had to go to the bathroom. He was afraid to go out in the dark. But he was more afraid of wetting the bed. Louis would make fun of him again. The more he thought about it, the more he had to go. "Frank?" he whispered. Frank snored. He was sound asleep. Gilbert would have to go alone. Carefully, he followed the path to the bathroom. But it seemed much longer than he remembered. He could easily get lost. Maybe he would end up wandering around the woods for years. Just like lost Leonard. At last, Gilbert spotted the bathroom cabin and ran toward it. But he tripped on a rock and dropped his flashlight. It went out. When he tried to find it, he knocked over some garbage cans. Clankety, clank clank. Gilbert groped around until he finally found the door. He stepped inside and was about to turn on the light when he heard an awful sound. Boo-hoo. Gilbert froze. The cry grew louder. Boo-hoo. It sounded like it was inside the bathroom. It's lost Leonard, Gilbert thought. Gilbert tried to run, but his feet wouldn't budge. Instead he held his breath and flipped the light switch. Yo! Gilbert screamed. Yo! Someone else screamed at the same time. But it wasn't a ghost. It was Louis. His hair was sticking straight up and he clutched a stuffed animal. Louis sniffed. Gilbert, you'd better hide. Lost Leonard is out there. Didn't you hear the clanking noise? Gilbert could see that Louis was very frightened. He felt sorry for him, but not sorry enough to tell him the truth. Gilbert bravely opened the door and called hello? Leonard? Are you out there? There was no answer. I think he's gone. Gilbert said, I don't hear any clinking. You're right, said Louis, picking out the door. But he waited for Gilbert to go out first, just in case. As they walked back to the cabin, Louis said, I wasn't really crying, you know. I think I had something in my eye. Gilbert said, that happens to me sometimes too. Then he stopped to pick up his flashlight and his teddy. He held up the stuffed possum and said, my mother packed this in my bag. Louis nodded and said, mine too. On the bus ride home, Patty said. Sleepaway camp was fun. Then she added, except for the ghost story. I kept thinking I heard noises in the middle of the night. Frank said, I'd be scared if I heard Lost Leonard. Louis laughed and said, what a bunch of scaredy cats. But when Gilbert turned around and yelled, boo! Louis jumped out of his seat and he was quiet for the rest of the ride home.